In 2026, the idea of running Kaspersky on a Linux desktop still feels controversial to some, unnecessary to others, and absolutely essential to a growing number of users. Linux has long carried the reputation of being immune to malware, or at least far less affected than Windows or Mac OS. That belief was never entirely true, but in the modern Linux desktop landscape of 2026, it is more outdated than ever. As Linux adoption continues to rise on personal desktops, laptops, developer workstations, and even gaming rigs, the threat model has shifted dramatically. Kaspersky's presence on the Linux desktop is no longer about chasing Windows-style viruses, but about adapting to a reality where Linux is a real target and security is no longer optional. To understand Kaspersky's role on Linux in 2026, you have to first understand how the Linux desktop itself has changed. Linux is no longer a niche operating system used only by sysadmins and hobbyists. Major distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Linux Mint, Arch-based systems, and even immutable desktops like Fedora Silverblue and OpenSUSE MicroOS are being used by developers, students, content creators, and enterprise employees every day. With the rise of Steam Gaming, Proton, Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage ecosystems, Linux desktops are now running complex software stacks that pull code from many sources. This alone increases the attack surface significantly. Kaspersky's Linux desktop products in 2026 reflect this shift. The company no longer treats Linux as a server-only environment with minimal user interaction. Instead, it acknowledges that Linux desktops now behave much closer to modern consumer operating systems, with browsers, messaging apps, cloud sync tools, IDEs, container runtimes, and package managers all running side by side. Each of these components introduces potential vulnerabilities, not necessarily through traditional Linux binaries, but through scripts, malicious archives, compromised repositories, and cross-platform malware. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Kaspersky on Linux is what it actually protects against. In 2026, Kaspersky is not primarily hunting for native ELF viruses that infect Linux executables in the same way Windows malware infects .exe files. Instead, its focus is on several key threat categories. The first is cross-platform malware, particularly Java-based, and JavaScript-based threats that run inside browsers, Node.js environments, or Electron apps. These threats do not care whether the host OS is Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. If the runtime exists, the malware can execute. The second major category is malicious scripts. Bash, Python, Perl, Ruby, and PowerShell core scripts are widely used on Linux desktops. A malicious script hidden inside a GitHub repository, Stack Overflow snippet, or random tutorial blog can cause serious damage if executed blindly. Kaspersky's heuristic and behavioral analysis in 2026 is specifically tuned to detect suspicious script behavior, such as unauthorized data exfiltration, credential harvesting, crypto mining, and persistence mechanisms. The third category is supply chain attacks. Linux users often trust their package managers implicitly, but in recent years, compromised repositories, malicious R packages, poisoned PyPI modules, and tempered npm dependencies have become a real threat. Kaspersky on Linux now integrates scanning workflows that target downloaded packages, archives, and source trees before installation or execution. This is especially relevant for developers who routinely clone repositories and run installation scripts without fully auditing them. In 2026, Kaspersky's Linux desktop solution is far more integrated than earlier versions. Historically, Linux antivirus tools felt like awkward server utilities bolted onto a desktop environment. They were command-line heavy, lacked real-time protection, and felt disconnected from the user's daily workflow. Modern Kaspersky for Linux has moved beyond that. While it still offers powerful CLI tools for advanced users, it now includes a lightweight graphical interface that integrates with popular desktop environments like GNOME, KDE Plasma, and even tiling window managers through tray indicators and notifications. Performance is one of the biggest concerns Linux users have when considering antivirus software, and Kaspersky has clearly optimized for this in 2026. Linux users are notoriously sensitive to background processes, CPU usage, and Disk I/O. Kaspersky's Linux engine now relies heavily on event-driven scanning rather than constant polling. Real-time protection hooks into file access events using modern kernel interfaces, scanning files only when they are accessed or modified, rather than aggressively scanning entire directories repeatedly. Memory usage has also been optimized. Kaspersky's Linux agent in 2026 runs as a modular service, loading only the components needed for the user's configuration. If web protection is disabled, browser traffic inspection modules are not loaded. If mail scanning is unnecessary, those components remain inactive. This modular design aligns well with Linux's philosophy and helps avoid the bloated security suite perception that many Linux users associate with antivirus software. Another important aspect of Kaspersky on Linux desktop in 2026 is its approach to privacy and telemetry. Linux users are generally more privacy conscious than average, and many are skeptical of proprietary security software. Kaspersky has responded to this by offering transparent telemetry controls, detailed logs, and the ability to run the product in a highly restricted mode. Users can see exactly what data is being collected, disable cloud-based reputation checks if desired, and rely solely on local signatures and heuristics. That said, cloud-based protection remains one of Kaspersky's strongest features. In 2026, threats evolved too quickly for offline signature databases alone to be sufficient. Kaspersky's Cloud Threat Intelligence Network allows Linux desktops to benefit from real-time reputation checks, zero-day threat detection, and rapid response to emerging malware campaigns. For Linux users who value maximum security, enabling cloud integration significantly improves protection, especially against brand-new threats that have not yet been fully analyzed. Browser protection is another area where Kaspersky on Linux has matured. In the past, browser extensions for Linux were often neglected or unsupported. In 2026, Kaspersky provides fully supported extensions for Firefox and Chromium-based browsers on Linux. These extensions protect against phishing sites, malicious downloads, fake login pages, and browser-based crypto mining scripts. Considering that the browser is the primary attack vector for most desktop users today, this layer of protection is arguably more important than traditional file scanning. Phishing protection deserves special attention in the Linux context. Many Linux users assume phishing is primarily a Windows problem, but that assumption is dangerously wrong. Phishing attacks target users, not operating systems. Kaspersky's phishing detection in 2026 uses machine learning models trained on global datasets, allowing it to detect sophisticated, localized phishing campaigns that mimic real services with alarming accuracy. This is especially relevant for Linux users who manage cloud services, developer accounts, and financial platforms from their desktops. Email scanning on Linux desktops is another interesting topic. While fewer Linux users rely on traditional desktop email clients compared to Windows, many still use Thunderbird, Evolution, or other mail applications. Kaspersky's Linux desktop solution can scan incoming and outgoing email traffic, detecting malicious attachments and links before they are opened. Even users who rely on webmail benefit indirectly through browser protection layers. One of the most debated topics surrounding Kaspersky on Linux in 2026 is whether Linux even needs antivirus software at all. The answer depends entirely on the user's threat model. A minimal Linux installation used offline with no third-party software and no untrusted files likely does not need antivirus. But that scenario is increasingly rare. Most Linux desktop users today download files, run scripts, use containers, install browser extensions, and interact with Windows and Mac OS systems through shared networks. In mixed OS environments, Kaspersky on Linux plays an important role in preventing Linux machines from acting as silent carriers of malware. Even if a Linux system is not directly affected by a Windows virus, it can still store, transfer, and spread infected files to other systems. Kaspersky's ability to detect Windows malware on Linux file systems helps prevent this kind of cross-platform infection, which is particularly important in offices, schools, and shared households. Developers are a major segment of Linux desktop users, and Kaspersky has increasingly tailored its features to them. In 2026, developer-focused protections include scanning Docker images, container volumes, and build artifacts. Malicious code hidden inside container images is a growing threat, especially as developers pull images from public registries without fully auditing them. Kaspersky can scan these images for known vulnerabilities, embedded malware, and suspicious behavior patterns. Another area where Kaspersky adds value on Linux desktops is ransomware protection. While Linux ransomware is still less common than its Windows counterpart, it does exist, and it is evolving. In 2026, ransomware targeting Linux desktops often focuses on user data directories rather than system files. Kaspersky's behavior-based ransomware detection monitors file modification patterns, detecting rapid encryption activity and blocking it before significant damage occurs. This is particularly important for users who store important work, code, or creative projects locally. The integration with system security features is also worth mentioning. Modern Linux desktops rely on technologies like SELinux, AppArmor, SEComp, and sandboxed application formats like Flatpak. Kaspersky in 2026 does not attempt to replace these mechanisms but works alongside them. It respects existing sandbox boundaries and uses system APIs rather than bypassing them. This cooperative approach reduces conflicts and aligns better with Linux security principles. However, Kaspersky on Linux is not without criticism. Some users remain uncomfortable with proprietary security software running with elevated privileges on an open-source operating system. Others argue that good security hygiene combined with system hardening and common sense is sufficient. There is also the philosophical debate about whether antivirus software encouraged risky behavior by creating a false sense of security. These criticisms are not entirely unfounded. Antivirus software, including Kaspersky, is not a magic shield. It cannot compensate for reckless behavior, such as running random scripts as root or disabling system security features unnecessarily. Kaspersky itself acknowledges this in its documentation, emphasizing that its Linux desktop solution is designed to complement, not replace, secure system practices. Installation and configuration in 2026 have become significantly easier than in the past. Kaspersky now provides official packages for major distributions, including DB and RPM formats, as well as support for immutable systems through containerized deployment models. This ensures compatibility with modern Linux desktops that do not allow traditional system-wide package installation. Updates are handled smoothly, with minimal user intervention. Signature updates are incremental and lightweight, reducing bandwidth usage. Engine updates are tested extensively to avoid breaking compatibility with new kernel versions, which has historically been a pain point for Linux security software. From a usability perspective, Kaspersky on Linux desktop in 2026 feels far less intrusive than many users expect. Notifications are configurable, scans can be scheduled intelligently to avoid peak usage times, and advanced users can fine-tune every aspect of the system. For those who prefer a set-it-and-forget-it approach, default settings provide strong protection without constant prompts. Ultimately, the relevance of Kaspersky on Linux desktop in 2026 comes down to one simple reality: Linux is no longer invisible. As Linux continues to grow in popularity on the desktop, attackers will follow. They may not target Linux in the same way they target Windows, but they will exploit its users, its ecosystems, and its trust-based workflows. Kaspersky's Linux desktop solution exists to address that reality, not to spread fear, but to provide an additional layer of defense in an increasingly hostile digital environment. For some users, Kaspersky on Linux will feel unnecessary. For others, especially those working with sensitive data, shared networks, or untrusted sources, it will feel like a logical and responsible choice. In 2026, using Kaspersky on a Linux desktop is no longer about questioning Linux's security. It is about acknowledging that security is a moving target, and no operating system, no matter how well designed, is immune to the evolving tactics of modern cyber threats.